YouTube to go live, just trying something new. We use software called Zoom, and they have a new feature where you can actually set something up for YouTube. See some more people coming in now. Dwight is here. Chris also. Nice to see you, Dwight. Just checking to see if the Facebook is going live as well. And also, I'm going to do, they have another feature for Facebook. So
Sure, Chris.
I'm going to try that as well.
Also, nice to see you, Dwight.
Okay, we're getting some feedback here. One moment.
Just checking to see if the Facebook is going live as well.
Okay, so we're getting some feedback, so I'm going to close YouTube, and we'll try that some other time. And the Facebook is not working, so we'll just stick to what we have here on our call. And we have some other people who came in. Gina, welcome. Kay, Heidi, nice to see you all here. So tonight we're going to be talking about an elimination diet and what it may, or if it is something that would be good for you or not. By the way, if there's any problem with the audio or the video, please do let me know. As I mentioned last week, and several of you were on the call last week we spoke about something called the 80-20 rule. And we'll get into a little bit about that because as the people from last week and the weeks before know, I'm in the process of writing a book. And some of the topics that we're discussing, you're actually helping me write the book by giving me feedback. So it's important for me, actually, if you would ask questions for anything that you have any questions about. Don't feel shy. There are no stupid questions ever, never, ever are there stupid questions. And the chat box is over here, so you can see that. Hopefully you see a little thing there that will allow you to put something into the chat box. And please do ask any questions that you have. I'm going to be sharing my screen now, which is should be coming up now. And this is a mind map. Mind map is really a way of categorizing your ideas in a visual form. And it is really good for lectures because it gives people an idea of how to structure their thoughts. And as I spoke about last week, when you're trying to become your own authority in health, it's important for you to be able to categorize things. Because as I mentioned last week, there's an infinite amount of knowledge out there, but unless you're able to categorize it into different things, into different categories, you know, you're just endlessly pursuing facts. And unless you can categorize these facts into something so that when you get a new fact, you can kind of put it in the right category, you're never going to be able to develop the knowledge and the wisdom required to be able to take care of yourself sort of in a modern way, becoming, as I say often, I use the expression that one of my teachers, of blessed memory by the name of Gerald Epstein, used to say, become your own authority in health, which doesn't mean that you are going to go to, you're going to become your own doctor in the sense of knowing everything about medicine and your body, but it will allow you to be able to make decisions for yourself and to seek out those experts that resonate with you that you can trust. But ultimately, you need to become your own authority and make those decisions for yourself. Now, in order to assimilate the knowledge that's required for that, doesn't mean you need to become an expert. It means that you need to be able to get broad outlines of the knowledge, establish the categories that are required for you to understand it, and then to be able to assimilate new knowledge by categorizing things properly. The 80-20 rule, which we spoke about last week, is so important because it further emphasizes the fact that you don't need to know everything else. That you need to know everything. You don't need to know everything. You just need to know the impactful 20% that yields 80% of the results. Now, many of you, it looks like, were not on the call last week. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 30% or so were on the call looks like on the call last week. So a brief introduction to the 80-20 rule, very, very brief, is that it was developed by an Italian economist who found that 20% of the land in Italy, this is back in the late 1800s, was owned, 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the people. And we see sort of that this rule, now it's not exactly 20, it's not exactly 80, it's what they call the law of the vital few, which is those few things that have an outsized impact. In fact, you can see this rule popping up all over the place, like 20% of your clothes you wear 80% of the time. And 20% of most businesses are 20% of the products yield 80% of the sales. 20% of the customers yield 80% of the problems. 80% of the customers yield 20% of the problems. It goes back and forth. Well, when it comes to health, and this was the subject of last week's webinar, we really spoke about how to identify the 20% of the things that you need to know that are going to yield 80% of the effect. Again, you don't have to know everything. If you can just get to that 80% or 90%, you've really made a tremendous impact in your health. And that's really what we're going for here. So when we think about an elimination diet, it really is 80-20 thinking, again, sort of duplicating in itself, because if you found that you have either an allergy or an insensitivity to something that you're eating, that can result in an 80%, an outsized improvement in your health. And that's really a very important thing to understand. Again, this rule is going to pop up at every single class that I give, that this 80-20 rule, that you don't need to know everything. And I always like to say that medical education online or on TV is really focused on just giving you fact after fact after fact without really giving you the categories and really giving you the things that are impactful. Now, the things that are impactful for you are going to be different for things that are impactful for others. And that's your responsibility to figure out for yourself. And it's my goal and my mission to be able to give you the modes of thinking and the knowledge to be able to learn to make those decisions for yourself. So why should you try an elimination diet? And that's really what we're going to be discussing here. And it may not be right for you. It may be something that you'll see as we go through this, but some form of elimination diet is helpful. It doesn't mean you have to do the medically defined definition of an elimination diet, and we'll get into that in just a moment. Now, when you go on an elimination diet, one of the things that I like to discuss is that health should be assessed from your subjective experience. And your subjective experience is often more accurate than sometimes lab reports. You know your health more than anyone else. No one can tell you more about you than you. And as much as modern medicine is geared towards creating gurus and experts and sort of deferring to them, the truth is that you need to refine and understand your subjective experience of health. And we need to learn to assess those things from 5 levels of experience. And these are, of course, as I've spoken about many times in other classes, physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and social. Now, it's hard, honestly, to be able to look at these 5 levels of experience and see or observe if there's going to be a change when you go on an elimination diet. But let's see if we can sort of think our way through this particular thing, these particular levels, and see if there's a situation that would allow us to see a difference. Well, physical, there is absolutely no question, of course, that if you have a sensitivity to, say, wheat and you give it up, you're going to see some improvement. The degree of improvement depends on a whole host of things, including your overall health in other realms. It could result in better sleep. Sometimes when people have a sensitivity to a food, they actually can have a reaction where their pulse increases and their temperature can go up slightly. This could interfere with sleep, and that could affect things. From an intellectual perspective, sometimes you can get from having issues with your gut, sort of brain fog, where so let's say you're getting a reaction, and you're having brain fog, and you're not thinking appropriately. Or from an emotional perspective, sometimes when you are reacting to something, you might have a short fuse. You might react to things a little bit quicker than usual. The point I'm trying to make with all of these things is that you need to broaden your subjective experience. You need to think of things from all these 5 levels so that you can really determine if you're getting an impact on any of these levels, not just the physical. I can't tell you, I can just give you some personal things. For example, I have a sensitivity to caffeine. I lack an enzyme. I discovered that. I sort of knew because I knew that I was sensitive to caffeine, but once I ran a genetic test on myself, I was able to determine that. And I realized that I was getting emotional, not instability, but like not evenness, even the day after I had caffeine. And that could be because my sleep cycles were altered. And of course, that begs that also, is something that lets us realize that all these things can be linked. You miss your sleep or you're in pain, that's going to affect your emotional level. The point here, just to repeat, is that we want to broaden our thinking about these things, and to become more in touch with ourselves, we need to be able to look at all these things when we make any kind of health change, because this is where we exist. We exist on the physical, we exist on an intellectual, our ability to form thoughts and to interact in an intellectual fashion. Of course, emotionally speaking, spiritual, our feeling of connectedness and transcendence, that can also be affected by a whole host of different things. And then social aspect. The social aspect here, we would have to get a little creative to sort of fit that into discussing elimination diets, but we could say from a social perspective, there might be foods in social settings that are going to pose a problem for you to be on an elimination diet. And we need to think about, well, if we're going to be on this, how is my social life going to be impacted? Not necessarily because of an allergy, but because of our pursuit of trying to get to the root of whatever may be troubling us, if we think it might be something that we need to get rid of in our diet. So those are your 5 levels of experience. So what's the effect of elimination diet? And let's go through that. Well, essentially, it is you're going to get rid of foods that you're allergic or sensitive to. Any elimination diet, you have to think of it from, there's the negative, but there's also the positive. And when you take out certain foods, you obviously have to fill them with something. And for most recommended elimination diets, you're going to increase the anti-inflammatory effects of food. And if you do that, then you're going to be able to see an anti-inflammatory effect. Now, when you go on an elimination diet, and we'll get into the downsides of an elimination diet very shortly, but when you are getting rid of something, you have to put something in. And one of the downfalls of people going on an elimination diet is that they end up putting in foods that they shouldn't be eating in the first place. So we want to have a net increase in the quality and the nutrient density of our food when we do that. And we do that essentially by increasing plant intake. We support the microbiome. And generally that's done when you increase the diversity of fiber in your diet, different plants, different fruits and such, that's going to support the microbiome. And again, when you're going on an elimination diet, we have to think about it, as I just said, not just from the negative, but from the positive. You want to get rid of certain things, but you also want to add certain things in. The other benefit is that it trains you to modify your diet in a programmable, easy way. And what I mean by that is that when you take this on, you are taking on something that has guidelines, and for a lot of people is the first modification of their diet that they've actually ever done. And this gives people a sense of accomplishment. Even if you just decided at the end of this lecture to cut your wheat intake by 95%, that's not obviously a medical elimination diet, but it is an elimination of something. So I'm including that in this discussion. Let's say you just did that and you saw an effect. You have just done something for yourself that is impactful and may represent sort of the one thing that you've done for yourself that allows you to then be able to make other decisions in your diet and maybe your exercise. I can't overestimate the impact that making sort of micro decisions has in your future health. Sometimes all it is making a few small things. That's why I spoke about the 80-20 rule. You never know what it's going to be. And I can't tell you, I have many, many patients who they just get rid of wheat for a couple weeks. It's almost always a dependable 5 to 10 pound weight loss if they get rid of wheat. Now, again, going along with that is the idea, again, that if you are eliminating something, you need to be ready to add something back in. And that's where cookbooks and learning how to increase the diversity of plants in your diet is going to make an enormous amount of impact. And we'll get into a little bit of that as we go on. We have a couple people who came in, welcoming you into the class. So who shouldn't do an elimination diet? And we'll get into, I wanted to see here. Okay. So who shouldn't do an elimination diet? I'm looking for something that I wanted to go through first, but that's okay. So people who are already ill, a full elimination diet is probably not going to be good for you. And what I mean by ill is an acute illness. You're trying to overcome some kind of infection or that sort of thing. Now, that wouldn't be the time to do a full elimination diet. Secondly, a full elimination diet is really not, well, we'll get into that as we go through allergies and intolerances, but a full elimination diet is usually something you do with a physician. Or I want to give you all that information, but I also want to discuss that there are things that you can do on your own. Second group of people are those that have an eating disorder. It's something that you should discuss with your doctor, because people who have an eating disorder, when they go onto an elimination diet and then they're eliminating even more food, then there could be a potential for making the eating disorder worse. And then pregnant women should not go on an elimination diet. They should, of course, discuss diet and do their own research about diet during pregnancy, but it's really not the time for you to be experimenting with your body in any way. Of course, these all sort of make sense. I'm going to go back to reintroduction in just a moment. So when we're talking about allergies versus intolerances, so 4% of adults have a food allergy. And these are really sort of the top 8 things that people are most commonly allergic to. Now, keep in mind that people can be allergic to anything. You can be allergic to anything. I've had patients who developing skin rash, and when he gave up broccoli, the rash went away. So this is really, again, sort of that 80-20 rule. This is sort of the small group of allergies that make up 80%, probably 90% of the allergies that we see. And there's probably, a whole host of other things that cause allergies, but we don't actually put that in this list. But obviously we're talking about dairy, eggs, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat. Peanuts are a legume, wheat, soy, fish, and more commonly than fish is shellfish. And oftentimes you'll see food labels that will say, free from all these things. And if you were suspecting an allergy to any of these, then doing any of these, eliminating, would be a form of an elimination diet. Now, if you truly have an allergy, it's worth getting evaluated by your doctor. And we'll get into why that is in just a moment. But bear in mind that there are several types of reactions that your body can have. There's a type 1 reaction, which is where you have what's called an anaphylactic reaction, where you can actually, your lungs can fill with fluid and you can die. Then there's type 4 reactions, and type 4 is where you can get skin rashes from different things. And if you truly have an allergy and you go on a elimination diet, the one risk is that when you reintroduce it, that if there was any increase in your reaction, you could end up having a really severe reaction to one of these things afterwards. That is why if an allergy is suspected, as opposed to an intolerance, which we'll talk about in just a moment, then once you've gone on an elimination diet, which can be, I usually recommend people do at least 3 weeks, preferably 6 weeks. If it's truly a type 1, what's called an IgE mediated type 1 reaction, that should be done with a doctor. And you should discuss that with a doctor. But that's 4% of adults. What we're going to talk about now is food intolerances. Now, food intolerances are something very different. These involve basically difficulty digesting foods. They could be from an enzyme deficiency, like lactose. It could be carbohydrate malabsorption. It can be reactions to sulfite or food coloring. And most recently, that's become somewhat controversial and in the news because of a book called The Plant Paradox, is plant defenses. Plants don't want to be eaten, and they all release things that try to prevent them from being eaten. And one of these is called a lectin. The other is phytic acid. There's several other what are called anti-nutrients that can be found in foods, and some people are sensitive to them. And Dr. Gundry, who wrote the book The Plant Paradox, as I mentioned, has found that when people go on lectin-free diets, several conditions can improve. And in fact, I've seen patients who were not, especially autoimmune disease patients, who were not improving until they actually got rid of lectins, or at least reduced their lectin exposure. Lectins are found in beans and in nightshade plants as well. And they can be eliminated by pressure cooking. You can still eat beans, but you can pressure cook them. So this is another thing. So we're talking about the difference and the distinction between those who have a food allergy and an intolerance. And if anyone has any questions, please do put them into the box. If you yourself have any allergies or any food intolerances, or you're not really sure, I'd love to hear it. And please put that into the text box. And I'll put that, place it here. And hopefully you see that on there. Okay. All right, let's keep on going. So what are the downsides? Well, the downsides are that there are reports of malnutrition in people who do it on their own with no guidance. And we'll get into why that is, because they often make common mistakes. And we'll go through those common mistakes in just a moment. But keep in mind that we've discussed already that when you go on an elimination diet, you need to think of it in a holistic fashion, that you're getting rid of foods that you're sensitive to or allergic to. You're increasing the anti-inflammatory elements of your diet. You're supporting the microbiome, and you're training yourself to modify your diet in a programmable, easy way. And I would add to this sort of in a, learning about healthy options to the foods you are avoiding. in a lot of ways, this can be the most important part of an elimination diet. You are basically making a small change, whether that's just trying to get rid of wheat, and you are learning to experiment with your body in a safe way. And that can be the most powerful thing that you can do. That one success in doing that is going to open up a whole new road for you to be able to control your health in ways that you never even thought were possible. And this is probably a good point in the class for me to really express to you this notion that when you make these changes, you become stronger each time you make a change. And the other thing that's really important to realize is that what your baseline is right now, how you feel right now, might not be where you could be next week or a year from now. In other words, we get used to how we feel, and this becomes our baseline. And you can always feel better than you feel now by making changes in your life. And you might feel fine. And I can't tell you how many times I've had patients who, again, sorry, but wheat happens to be one of those things. They get rid of wheat and they don't realize that they didn't actually feel all that great. It was only until they got rid of wheat, sometimes dairy, that they realized that the level that they feel now, which has become their new baseline, they realized that before they actually didn't feel all that great, but they didn't really know any better. And I always tell people that particular situation because it means that we are on sort of this never-ending pursuit of learning about your body, learning about your health from, as I said, always keeping in mind the 5 levels of experience: physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and social. And on all of these 5 levels, we are at a baseline. All of us tend to be at a baseline. And we can increase our physical feeling of wellness. Look, we can't control our physical completely. That's just the truth of the matter. You could get everything right and you could still get sick. That's just the nature of being human. But there are things that we have in our control. And when we improve on them, almost always you can improve the baseline feeling of health that you have. Same thing goes on an intellectual level, where the level of our thoughts are, where the level of our emotions are, where our level of feeling of connectedness in a spiritual sense, and also how connected we feel with people on a social level. These are all your 5 levels of experience that can be improved upon. And again, one of the ways of learning about how to break the baseline that we're at is to try to eliminate something and see how you feel. And maybe you'll feel worse. You probably won't, but maybe you'll feel worse. Most likely you'll feel better. And you'll say, hey, I don't want to go back to where I was before. You might have, as I said, you might have felt totally okay. It might have been fine. You might have said, yeah, I feel good. I wake up, I exercise, I eat well. But I can't tell you how many times people give something up and they feel better than they felt before. And they're like, wow, that's really something. I thought I was perfectly fine. So this is one of the most powerful things about trying an elimination diet. Okay, so let's go back to the downsides, and then we'll call it a night. This topic I didn't think would last the full hour, but maybe we'll continue going. That's usually what happens with our classes for those people who are on here. I see several, like Donna, Doreen, Dwight, all of you, and Marcia as well, have been on several of my classes. So appreciate your continued attendance. So these are common mistakes on elimination diet from a website called Mind Body Green. And I really think that she really categorized them very, very well. So the first is not scheduling appropriately, meaning, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. You really do have to plan things out when you're going on an elimination diet. Now, if you're just getting rid of one thing, maybe it's not going to require as much scheduling or planning. But if you're getting rid of a lot of things, then you need to schedule properly. Too many processed foods. This goes back to what we spoke about just a couple of minutes ago, which is where we need to think of elimination diet from the positive and from the negative. So the negative, of course, is we're going to get rid of something, but then we also have to add something in. What a lot of people do is, instead of adding lots of plants into their diet as substitutes, or lean, healthy proteins, they end up putting in processed foods because it's just easier to put in, run-of-the-mill veggie burger, to fill up something. That often happens. So that's something you need to be very, very conscious of. Some people go overboard on certain foods. So they might feel like they need calories, so they go crazy on avocados and nuts and honey and maple syrup and other alternatives because they need to sub something in. They love avocados, but if you're getting rid of all your bread and milk, let's say, and you feel like you need to get extra calories and you're eating 3 avocados a day, that's just too many avocados. Same thing goes with nuts. People will I've had many patients who end up eating almond butter, too much almond butter, and there's problems with that. Any one food that you overeat is going to be a problem. And nuts can be a problem because, one, if they're not properly prepared, you can have there's sometimes they're fried, so you have rancid oils, roasted in oil and such. Also, it upsets the omega-3, omega-6 balance in your diet. So people are just spooning in tablespoons of almond butter. That's an issue. The other thing that can happen is restricting calories too much. So you get rid of certain things, and then you end up not eating enough calories. Failing to keep a written log of symptoms. So this goes back to what we were speaking about earlier. We need to broaden our observation to the 5 levels of experience. And certainly writing out helps. You don't have to keep a written log of symptoms, but for people who are going on elimination diets, a lot of them have various complaints, from brain fog to irritable bowel syndrome like conditions, to joint aches and pains, to miscellaneous skin rashes. So she's sort of addressing people who have a spectrum of lots of different types of symptoms, and to try to keep a log. What I would say is that in addition to those physical symptoms, you should pay attention to the clarity of your thinking and how that's been affected by your elimination, your emotional stability, which there's no question is impacted by foods, even your spiritual sort of sense of peace, connectedness, that sort of thing, and socially, how it's interacting with you, how your elimination diet is impacting your social interactions. We had someone just came in. Hi, Lydia. Welcome. There will be a recording, Lydia, so you'll get to hear the majority of the lecture. And then expecting that you'll feel miraculously better. What I would say is, going back to that thing that baseline that I discussed before, I wouldn't have false or grandiose expectations that you're going to heal every particular problem that you have by going on an elimination diet. This is one small thing that, although it's a small thing, can have a big impact, but it's not necessarily going to be the thing that's going to make everything better. There is no the thing. Modern medicine is used to giving medicine to one thing to cure something. But when we think about our overall health, that type of logic where one thing can impact everything, where one medicine can fix everything, if we translate that to making changes in our life where one thing is supposed to impact everything, that's a grandiose expectation that is most likely not going to happen. So when you go on an elimination diet, and we'll talk about what I would consider to be the first step in just a moment, then really you shouldn't expect anything miraculous. In fact, all I would say for you and for everyone and my patients is not to have any expectations, that this is an exercise in understanding your body and being able to make a change to your life in a programmable way, as I said, that's going to allow you to make decisions about your health with more strength the next time around. If you happen to see improvement, that's fabulous. But we're going to just keep attention to the 5 levels of experience and our baseline. So how we feel now and how we feel, whether that baseline has changed in any of those particular 5 different things. So those are the common mistakes that people make when it comes to elimination diets. So going back to what I would consider, these are the top allergens that we have: milk, eggs, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soy, fish, and shellfish. Where would I start? If weight loss is an issue, there's no question that getting rid of wheat is going to make a huge impact in your health. I see it all the time. A dependable 5 to 10 pound weight loss when you get rid of wheat. Now, again, we've spoken about the negative, taking out the wheat, but what are we going to add? So we're going to want to add some healthy fat and some plants, majority, and you really need to come up with that on your own. So if you're going to if you're used to having a sandwich for lunch, you really need to figure out what you're going to do, not having a sandwich. And for some of you, that sounds like it's not an issue. But for a lot of people who are used to eating a sandwich every day for lunch since they were kids, since their parents packed it in their lunch boxes, to tell them that they are no longer going to have to be able to eat a sandwich because it's got bread in it, that comes with a lot of problems. Well, what am I going to eat? Well, I don't want to eat a salad. I don't want to, try, I can't think of a good thing. But the point is that a lot of people will say, well, just taking that example, I'm not going to eat a salad for lunch. I'm not going to be hungry with a salad. Well, look, you can create a salad that is going to be filling. You really need to spend a lot of time figuring out how to do that. And that could be a salad that has some good beans on it. The protein that you might have had in your sandwich might be in the salad. Creative, healthy dressings with healthy fat. Sometimes it requires oddly enough, increasing healthy fats to get the calories and the satiety, the feeling of satiety that you would get from a sandwich. These are problems that happen when you go on an elimination diet. And wheat is probably the number one for weight loss if you just get rid of wheat. There are problems with wheat that were first probably brought to the attention of the public from that book called The Wheat Belly, that basically said that there are sort of addictive qualities to wheat that make it very, very difficult for people to get rid of wheat from their diet. And that you can go through sort of a withdrawal set of symptoms when you get rid of wheat. And it is, I've experienced that when I've completely gotten rid of wheat. You do feel a little bit uneasy for a couple weeks. Some of that might be just the subjective feeling that you feel like you need to eat meat, feel like you need to eat wheat. Some of it might be physical, as was described in that book, this sort of sensation of a feeling of getting high, or a feeling of wellness with wheat. The same thing goes with milk. Milk has a chemical in it called casomorphone, which is related to morphine. And it's one of the things when I see patients, especially acne patients especially women, for some reason, tend to have a very, very difficult time getting rid of milk and cheese. And when you get rid of milk and cheese, for people who are eating a lot of it, that can really make acne go away. or at least improve dramatically. And milk, because of this chemical that is in milk and is probably there to, I'm not sure this is the case, but it probably is because you wanted the calf to have a good feeling from drinking milk so that it would want to come back for milk to increase its rate of survival. And we're getting that sort of side effect when we have milk. And now cheese is concentrated. Cheese is just really concentrated milk. So you're getting an enormous amount of that with cheese. So sometimes I'll have people say, well, I can get rid of milk, but I can't get rid of cheese. I just love cheese. Well, the issue there is, well, cheese does taste good, but there's something else going on there, because there's not that many foods out there where people say, I just can't give it up. And cheese is one of those things. And there's no question that this is partially because of some of the addictive qualities of the milk. I would say that if you could try to do milk and wheat for 3 weeks, assuming you don't think you have an actual allergy, but obviously if you thought you had an allergy, you probably would have gotten rid of it already. But these two things, milk and wheat, if you just get rid of those for 3 weeks, that's the most, it's the most impactful two that I would say in terms of raising the level of your baseline to a feeling better, getting rid of milk and wheat. Now, you can go 95%. You can go 90%. I'm not saying you have to go complete elimination. In fact, I read a report, I don't remember where, that, and I haven't confirmed it, but the report basically said something to the effect that you have bacteria in your gut that can help digest wheat. And when you're completely off of wheat, then those gut bacteria go away, so that when you do eat wheat again, your body can't process it and you get sick. Now, this does make sense to me, because there's often times I'll meet people where they'll say, oh, I gave up wheat and now I can't even eat it. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense physiologically speaking, unless this was the explanation. Because you shouldn't, unless there was an allergy. Allergies can get worse, but this is most likely as sort of a sensitivity to wheat, such that they're now having trouble digesting it. And now we're talking about sort of this food intolerance category, which is down here. Milk, milk has its issues. I'm not a vegan, but milk, like the way they raise cows, and I think there's issues with, unless you know where your milk's coming from. But honestly, I don't think there's much redeeming value to milk and cheese in general. Now, there are traditional cultures that have eaten milk and cheese, and I'll talk about that in another class, where we'll be talking about traditional foods and traditional methods of preparation of foods. But when it comes to modern society, milk, cheese, dairy, it has very little redeeming value in terms of human nutrition, the way it is right now. Not just from its hormonal effect, its animals preferentially secrete certain chemicals into their milk. So if the cow is raised in sort of a conventional feedlot where it's just nasty and disgusting, those toxins preferentially bind to fat. And sometimes certain toxins actually preferentially are excreted from the body through milk, which means you're getting this concentrated in milk. So on top of that, when you have cheese, it's even more concentrated. So, and then on top of that there's a protein called A1, casein A1, which is responsible for all kinds of food allergies, and which is another reason why people don't react to either. There's an A2 milk you can buy, which doesn't have that A1, and A2 is also found in goat milk, which is less allergenic. But those milks still have those other issues that I spoke about. And those to me are significant. And same thing goes with eggs. When you're dealing with eggs, if the chickens are again raised in a conventional feedlot, the same thing's happening. You're getting concentration of toxins most likely in the egg yolks because it's the fat, and that can be an issue. Peanuts, in addition to the allergy issue, peanuts are often contaminated by a fungus that is responsible for a lot of liver cancers, and peanuts are very difficult to find in sort of a really healthy way. Wheat, we spoke about. Soy, generally speaking, I don't think you necessarily need to include that. There are traditional means of preparing soy, like soy sauce is fermented, and natto, which is a fermented soybean. There are probably healthy ways of eating soy, but if you wanted to try that, you certainly could. Fish and shellfish, again, fish, you want to eat. I think if you don't think you have an allergy, there's probably no sense in getting rid of fish. However, again, this is off topic, but you want to eat fish that don't have a lot of mercury in them. This is another issue. So sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and herring. That's the mnemonic is SMASH. Sardines, mackerel, anchovies, salmon, and of course wild caught salmon, not farm salmon, and herring. And these are the foods that are going to be, these are the fish that are probably going to be much healthier for you. Shellfish, I don't have much to say about shellfish. However, I will tell you that more people have shellfish allergies than fish allergies. And I certainly see in my medical practice that shellfish and nuts and wheat are probably the top three. And this is just personally subjective. Now, what about if you think you have an allergy? Well, there are lots of different ways of testing for a food allergy. There's a blood test. There's for a certain type of reaction, there are skin tests that allergists do. And there are various, as I said, there's that blood test, but there are various types of blood tests. Some people think that the standard IgE test that you get from your Quest or your LabCorp is actually not all that great. And there are other companies out there that have more advanced panels that are able to detect allergies in a more efficient way. But these are sort of new tests, and most doctors aren't aware of them. If you do feel like that's something that you think you might need to do is to get an advanced allergy test, then feel free to contact me, as always, at Jonathan, JONATHAN, at miraclenoodle.com. Most of you, I'll just type that here. And that's my email address if you wish to contact me. Okay. All right. Well, actually, it did take up most of the hour. That's usually what happens when we get together. Let's go through this very, very briefly again, sort of an executive summary of what we spoke about. So we spoke about, and the things that I wanted to highlight here is that we shouldn't underestimate, even though I told you not to have grandiose expectations, we shouldn't underestimate the fact that there could be something in your diet that is preventing you from sort of going to that next level. And therefore, the 80-20 rule even applies here, that it could just be one thing that's having an oversized impact on your health. Secondly, we need to broaden our experience of health to not just the physical. And as I spoke about myself, when it comes to caffeine, there's no question that, yeah, well, I do get a boost from caffeine and from an intellectual level shortly. But I've noticed that the day after, because I'm lacking an enzyme in processing it, that the next day I feel like intellectually I'm not as strong. That's an example of caffeine affecting my intellectual Emotionally, I'll give you another example. When your blood sugar goes up and down, you are not necessarily as emotionally stable as you might be if your blood sugar was rock steady. That's why a lot of you, or several of you on this call, have gone through my fasting mimicking diet. And for the first time in a lot of people's lives, when they go on the fasting mimicking diet, because their blood sugar is rock steady for 5 consistent days, they start to realize how much their emotions were being impacted by the food that they were on. And this is another reason why people and traditions and cultures and religions around the world instituted some form of fasting. If you're not familiar with what the fasting mimicking diet is, it's a reduced calorie diet for 5 days. And we have people, lots of people who go through that. So if you're interested in that, definitely reach out to me and I'll send you some more information. We did a nice webinar on that in the past. And that links to spiritual. And of course, social, our connectedness with people around us. That is something that is part of our life and part of our overall health. And we should be broadening our understanding of health to these particular levels. So we know what an elimination diet can do, but also that it's positive and a negative. We want to plan appropriately to increase mostly plants and leafy greens and such. When we reduce something, we have to add something back in, or else you're at risk for getting a food eating disorder or missing vital nutrients, that sort of thing. We're supporting the microbiome, and more than anything else, you're doing something that will allow you, give you the motivation and the knowledge that you've been able to do something for yourself. And we reviewed who shouldn't go on it, that if you suspect an allergy, an actual allergy, which sometimes can cause really severe, even life-threatening reactions, then you really need to be working with a doctor for reintroduction of those foods. If we're dealing with food intolerances, then that's a different issue. And these are some of the, and this could be a whole host of foods, even the foods that we're discussing here can also be here. You can have a situation where you're not allergic, you're just sort of intolerant to a certain food. There's no question I feel healthier when I'm off of wheat, but I don't have the genetics for having celiac disease. I don't have celiac disease. I don't have antibodies, etc. But there's no question I feel better when I don't eat wheat. So that's sort of the issue. Now, I happen to have, and I went through this on our nutrigenomics lecture a couple of weeks ago, that I happen to have, and if anyone wants to know what type of test I do, also reach out to me. But I have a gene that predisposes people to type 2 diabetes. And it's sort of like the skinny person's type 2 diabetes. Sometimes you'll see someone who they're not overweight, they're pretty healthy, but they have type 2 diabetes. And that can be worsened with wheat. So it could be that when I eat wheat, I do have an enhanced increase in blood sugar. And that might be why I don't feel that well. Nonetheless, I've gotten rid of a fair number of grains from my diet. And therefore, so there's that. And then we went on to common mistakes. And this sort of highlights the fact that when we take something off, we got to put something back in. And all these things, if you are making these mistakes, essentially you're not planning appropriately and you're not filling things in appropriately. So that is why people should consider doing an elimination diet. I see a question here from Dwight. For someone who has no indication of either allergy or intolerance, but suspects something is not right in dietary terms, what would you suggest as a first step related to elimination diet? What kind of methodology as a do-it-yourself project? So I would just get rid of, I always suggest milk, dairy, and wheat as a first start, no question about it, and see what happens. If you feel like something is not right in dietary terms, You know, that's sort of, I'm just thinking out loud, Dwight, but I almost always suggest getting rid of dairy and wheat for 3 weeks just to see how you feel. If someone feels that something's not right in dietary terms, probably I would then do a food, have someone do a food diary for a couple weeks so I could see maybe there's something glaringly offset, you know, something that they might be eating too much of. There's no question that just doing a food journal or doing something on chronometer, this is probably the best one out there. And actually, if anyone is interested in me analyzing their, I have clients that I do that for a very small fee. Definitely reach out to me. But oftentimes, even on my own, I've noticed things in my diet by doing a food journal. And Chronometer is just an amazingly easy food journal that I was missing out on. One of the things I was missing out was on zinc. I noticed that with Chronometer, it actually totals up all your nutrients. And I noticed that I was low in zinc. And in combination with my genetic pattern, which we went over, and many of you are actually getting that genetic report. So it takes a couple of weeks. Look forward to going over that with you. Again, if anyone wants to get that report, reach out to me or go to this website. And then let me know, and I'm happy to spend the time going over your genetic report. But I noticed also my genetic report, there's a reason that I need to be careful with getting appropriate levels of zinc. And since I've started taking zinc consistently, maybe I feel better. I just really honestly feel like I feel better. And so it wasn't just the genetic test, but it was going through Chronometer and seeing what was sort of missing in my diet. So I may not go to, going back to Dwight's question, I may not necessarily go to an elimination diet right off the bat. I would probably review a couple weeks of what they eat and then see what may or may not be, quote, right in dietary terms. So hope that answers your question. Anyone else have any questions? I'll stay on for just a moment. We did reach the end of the hour. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I see that everyone stayed on, which I'm always appreciative of, that you spent the whole hour with me, which I am going to venture to say that means that you found it somewhat helpful or interesting, or you probably would have dropped off. I know I probably would drop off if I didn't feel like I was getting anything out of it. So I hope that means that you did get a lot out of it. And of course, I've left my contact if you have any questions about anything that I've discussed in terms of this or any other week, whether it's about the food journal or nutrigenomics or elimination diet or the 80-20 rule. And we're going to be going through probably every week. Next week, I'm in California for a trade show, so I won't be doing a class next week, but the week after that, we'll get right back into it. And everything's going to come together. Again, your questions and your comments are so important to me because I will be transcribing this lecture and editing it and getting it into book format each week. And sort of each week is going to be a chapter and in my book, and I'll be expanding it. And hopefully you'll be able to join me on this journey of putting this book together. And so I'm greatly appreciative of all of you attending tonight. And I hope you got at least one thing out of this particular lecture, and wish everyone a good night. And I'll see you in a couple weeks. And please do feel free to reach out to me should you have any questions. Have a great night, everyone.